over the course of the next 2 days. And we all know that Africa is the world's food basket. And yet, ironically, it's sad to say that many people in Africa are food insecure. We'll also discuss the ecosystem conservation and rural livelihoods. At the end of this conference, you will have key outcomes in each of the thematic areas listed in your program. Your deliberations will also inform the agenda for next year's Landscape Management in Africa conference. For those of you who are tech savvy, may I encourage you to join the conversation on Twitter. The hashtag is LPFN in Africa. I'll repeat that again. Capital L, capital P, capital F in Africa. And you could also follow the conference organizers. If you don't feel like coming up with your own tweets, you could follow them at ICRAF and also at EcoAgPartners and just simply retweet their tweets. I'll be tweeting, so you could follow me and follow any other conference organizers who are on your program. I encourage you to join the conversation, and let's see if we'll be trending on Twitter today. Let's see if we can make that. May I encourage you to please switch off your phones or put them on silent for the course of for the duration of this, while you're inside this conference room. And I will not take much more of your time. We do have quite a program this morning, and I want to quickly introduce our first speaker of the day. Our first speaker is Mr. Tony Simons. Mr. Tony Simons is the Director General of the World Agroforestry Center. Tony has worked for 27 years on issues at the tropical agriculture-forestry interface in more than 40 developing countries and has more than 100 research articles to his name. So if you think a tweet is too much, imagine 100 articles. Tony is an honorary professor in tropical forestry at the University of Copenhagen and a board member of Africa's Center for Technology Studies, Plant Resources of Tropical Africa, Danone Livelihood Fund, and DCM International Imaging. He's also the leader of the International Union of Forest Resource Organizations, Forest and Water Task Force. Tony is passionate about the transformative and profitable change that the private sector can bring to development. When I asked Tony which team he's supporting for the World Cup, he quite diplomatically said, may the best team win. Without much further ado, please welcome Mr. Tony Simons.
Good morning, everyone. And what a delight to see so many people here traveling from such a distance. It's a bit cold this morning, but it will warm up during the day, intellectually, I'm sure, as well as thermally. But perhaps we could congratulate ourselves because you are in the best workshop this week. You have chosen the best set of partners, and you are all engaged in one of the most promising initiatives we have to help landscapes, people, food, and nature in Africa. So warm yourselves up and congratulate yourselves for those three things. And it's exciting times. Just over 2 years ago, we met in this room to chart this wonderful partnership led by EcoAgricultural partners on landscapes of people, food, and nature. And there were, Sarah, I remember some 80 or 90 terms that came out of that, and these are the top 30. So if your term is not there, I'm sure you will find it in the remaining 60 or so that were recorded then. And so our task in the next 3 days is to look at what type of dialogues and learnings there have been in the past 2 years around awareness, policy, planning, demonstrations, implementation, alignment, community, collective, finance, and capacity and training. But we've also got to make sure that LPFN is linking and aligning with other processes and initiatives. Why another initiative, some people may be asking. We already have climate smart agriculture. We already have forest landscape restoration. There is a new global partnership on forests and landscape restoration. It was launched just last week. We have the Bond Challenge. We have the Global Landscapes Forum. We have Landcare. So is LPFN inclusive or exclusive? Complementary or competitive? Differentiated or duplicative? And is it bringing clarity or is it bringing confusion? And we have to keep that in our minds as we go in these next 3 days to make sure we are being inclusive, complementary, well differentiated, and bringing clarity. We've also got to link up to high-level international topics, particularly climate change, in the run-up to Paris 2015. We look to the recent fifth assessment report, both on the evidence, the mitigation and the adaptation side of that, and there's a compelling need to frame our discussions, particularly our development discussions, in a different way. It's not development or environment. It isn't either or, it is about how we combine those together. And ICRAF is pleased to be one of those 11 centres of excellence for the Climate Technology Centre Network, led by UNEP and UNIDO, to bring actual concrete examples for national and subnational and development use. Just 3 weeks ago, the Land Use Technical Expert meeting in Substa looked to frame the landscape issue around agriculture, forestry, and LULUCF to rekindle interest and activity in that area. And if you haven't received a copy of that summary, I'll be happy to share that with you. Not only linking to higher level topics, we've also got a link to high-level institutions, particularly the World Bank, who in their spring meeting set out 2 key goals, and that was to end poverty by 2030, and that's just not economic poverty, that's also resource and asset poverty, and to promote growth in the bottom 40%, and not just look at average GDP levels. And when we look inside that report at green growth strategies and framing the synergies and urgencies, that win-win box in the bottom right-hand corner is exactly what LPFN is trying to do. So in terms of land use planning and sustainable intensification of those rural landscapes. Surely the time is now for LPFN to come out and show its merit. We've also got to be aware of other very important topics, particularly women's status and control over resources. And yes, we still need great progress in gender equity, in gender equality, in gender balance. But we also need to change the conversation around gender synergy, because it's not just about bringing one up to the level of the other, but how together those two genders can synergize to take it to that higher level. And so the processes, the tools, the training, the budgeting that are needed, the outputs in terms of the partnership, the planning and indicators around gender mainstreaming, and lastly, that impact, the results orientation that we seek to get greater access, participation, and benefits from all groups, but particularly the women dimension. And so, really our challenge in the next 3 days is to go beyond dialogues and learnings, and to take those 10 items and to talk about our awareness action and our policy actions and our alignment actions and our financial actions and means of implementation action. Those are the key things we need to address in the next 3 days. And so it's about taking our very important word cloud from 2 years ago, brilliant terms, brilliant opportunities for raising awareness and engaging and changing policy instruments. But if we were to change that word cloud and look forward, it would look probably something more like this. Now is the time for action. Because this is Landscapes for People, Food and Nature, an international initiative for dialogue, learning, and action. And last thought, as we look to have some quick wins, let us also remember that we tend often to overestimate what we can achieve in the short term. But at the same time, we tend to underestimate what we can achieve in the long term. And it is those long-term goals that LPFN needs to orientate ourselves towards and be very clear on. Thank you for coming to ICRAF and choosing LPFN as one of your partners.
Thank you very much, Tony, for those opening remarks. Indeed, I hope that this will not be just any other talk shop, but we will come out with action, 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 action that is inclusive, action that will differentiate, and action that has clarity. Let me introduce the next speaker during this session of our overview, who is James Karanja Nyoro. James Karanja Nyoro works for the government of Kenya, even though he supports Team, what you said, okay, Team Netherlands, actually. He supports Team Netherlands. And again, he said it's not because they're sponsoring this conference. James is the Senior Food Security and Climate Change Advisor to the Presidency, based at the Office of the Deputy President. His responsibilities include providing the strategic direction to the government to systematically and sustainably formulate, facilitate, and implement policies and programs that will ensure that Kenya attains its food security targets while also improving the livelihoods of a large number of producers. Prior to joining government, Mr. Nyoro was actually the managing director of the Rockefeller Foundation, in charge of its African region-based programs. Mr. James Nyoro, welcome to the podium.
Good morning. Thank you very much for that introduction. I'm very excited to be here today for two reasons. One, over the last 25 or so years, I've been sitting on that side, prescribing to government of what needs to be done and private sector and stakeholders. But over the last 10 months, I've been on this other side, receiving that kind of prescription. And the question really I ask myself is, what is the difference? But before I come to that, let me, on behalf of the government of Kenya, welcome you all to Nairobi, and particularly to this conference. Nairobi is usually warmer than it is today. Today being 1st of July is the beginning of our winter. So we are going to enjoy this kind of weather for the next 1.5 months. But you come back in September, it will be better. When I look at the theme of this conference, and I've worked with Sara when I was working for the Rockefeller Foundation. The last time I met her, we were at COP17 in Durban. I feel it is very, very relevant, not just for Kenya, but for Africa. Those of you who are familiar with the situation in Kenya do know that we do have food, water, and energy insecurity, particularly food insecurity. 25% of our population, about 10 million Kenyans, are chronically food insecure. About 2 to 3 million will probably be on famine relief at any one point, if not more, depending on the weather conditions. Further, about 30% of our children are stunted, suffering from malnutrition. From that point of view, if you then look at what is expected to happen over the next 20 years, up to 2030, when we do have a vision of being globally competitive, to achieve a middle-level income, and where we expect our economy to grow at 10% per annum, we'll probably have a population of 60 million people, up from 43 today, because we are growing at 2.5% per annum. It means that we have to feed 60 million people. When you look at energy requirements, you do have challenges as far as fuel and other energy sources are concerned, particularly to the poor and the vulnerable. The same with water. Except now that we do have some water resources in Turkana and do have the potential to get some other groundwater, we are essentially a water scarce country. So if you look at the situation and the population growth that we expect over the next 15, 20 years, that is going to subject our landscape, our environment into more challenges as we feed more people, as we depend on water, and so on and so forth. As if that is not enough, climate change comes in as another factor that then influences the achievement of the goals that we are talking about. And therefore, the need to start addressing the issue of integrated landscape management become very important. And we have to start with the people. It's so interesting. And again, when I look at myself working out of government and now working within government, you hear of projects, you hear of us talking about tourism, you hear of us talking about forestry, conserving our forestry. We hear about water resources, rivers and so on, but you never hear the people being at the center of that discussion. And I think starting to think about large scale for people, food and nature, then drives the point that we are doing this just to ensure that our people are better off. So for me, it's very, very, very interesting, and I'm very excited, and I'll be looking forward to hear what you guys are going to come up with, because specifically there are 3 challenges that we need to look at as we move forward. As I said, as our environment is going to be subjected into further stress as we improve our livelihood, we need to consider 3 things. The first one is, how do we ensure that we increase our agricultural productivity? How do we ensure that our people do get better incomes from the resources that they already have, so that we are not talking about extending the areas that we are working on, but intensifying the areas in a much more sustainable manner? How do we ensure that those communities you visited yesterday, whether in Naivasha or Rari or other places, do get better 3-4 times incomes from what they are doing today without overexploiting the resources? So that's the first one. So we have a whole array of issues that we are looking at, talking about input and input supplies, talking about marketing, innovative marketing systems, warehousing receipting systems, and so on, so that you can maximize on the resources that those people are already doing. So that's the first one. The second issue that we need to address is, how do you ensure that there is harmonious integration of the people living within a particular watershed? And Naivasha is a typical example. We may be talking about Imarisha right now and what Imarisha is doing, but there are challenges. Because for a long time, we are being driven by private profits. So our constituents within the watershed do not see the interrelated, do not see the relationship between themselves, because we are being driven by private profits. When we are driven by private profits, we are sometimes doing this at the expense of social costs. How do we ensure that we come up with policies that balance, that encourages people, yes, to make private profit, but at the same time are able to compensate for some of those social costs, and therefore you have a balance? Now that is a challenge. We need evidence. We need to have people working together. We need to monitor. And then the third challenge is, how do we then ensure that there is shared values among the stakeholders? And the case for Naivasha, again, is the same. How do we ensure that we bring in the private sector into this? How do we ensure that the investors are actually investing in the watershed, not just for corporate social responsibility, but as a factor that they will be able to increase their profitability in the short, medium, and longer term? These are the issues. And if you succeed in Naivasha, if you succeed in Lari and other places, how do you replicate that into the rest of the country and the rest of the continent? Now, these are the challenges that I'm hoping that by the time we are through over the next 2 days, we'll be able to address. I think for us, as a country and as a government, we are addressing those issues. We are much more stakeholder driven. We know that we do have challenges on food security, and obviously climate change. So there are certain things that we are doing, but we benefit more from having an interface of what you guys are doing and what we are doing, and therefore having some stakeholders, government people in such a meeting so that we are working with them, we are not working for them, and having the private sector so that we move out of social corporate responsibility into a much more investment-driven kind of policy environment. I thank you.
Sounds like we already have action already. Hey, we are deliberations. Mr. Nyoro has assured us will definitely be listened to by government. So as one step forward, let's at least have those deliberations. Our next speaker is Ibrahim Thiaw. Ibrahim Thiaw. Ibrahim Thiaw is UNEP's Deputy Executive Director General. In this capacity, Mr. Thiaw plays a critical role in implementing UNEP's medium-term program strategy, as well as engaging government. So without much further ado, please welcome Mr. Thiaw.
Thank you very much. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. You forgot to inform the participants that my team is Germany. I'm very pleased to be here today, and I guess if I'm invited to this LPFN, it's probably for the N, most likely for the P, certainly for the L as well. And many people would think that UNEP has nothing to do with food. And my task today in the next 5 minutes is to prove you wrong. N is nature. Nature is the food provider. Food is not provided to Kenyan's people by the Ministry of Agriculture. Nature provides fish. Fish is not provided to Kenyan's people by the Ministry of Fisheries. Nature provides tourism. Millions of people come to Kenya not to see the CBD of Nairobi, but to see nature. Nature provides health, the air we breathe and that we take for granted. Nature provides water that we drink. The water is not coming from the tap. These bottles of water are not coming from a plant. They are coming from nature. Therefore, in the soup that Tony showed us, the soup of terms that he showed us today, which he reminded me was actually projected here in this very room 2 years ago, I choose to just focus on 2 terms. One is land use planning. The other one is integration or integrated approach. And I would like to just very briefly fly over 4 main concepts. One is land and water. Many people in this room would say only 4% of agricultural land in Africa is irrigated. What is an agricultural land? Is it the forest that you clear to plant more cereals? What is agricultural land? Is it the pastoral land that you transform into farming lands? And what is agricultural land? Is it the wetlands that you dry up, that you drain to produce more food? We have to fundamentally think about our definitions. And if agricultural land is everything that is irrigable, yes, it is 4%. If agricultural land is the land on which you can produce to feed the billion people of Africa today, 2 billion to come in the next 40 years, then we need to fundamentally rethink about our production systems. And I will come back to that. Africa is has the second highest deforestation rate in the world after South America. So we have to think about what is it that we want to do in trying to feed the billion people in Africa today. No single African country had a net gain in terms of reforestation, deforestation, or afforestation. No single country in Africa had a net gain. What does it mean? We are losing our forest resources. Africa is the continent where you have the highest rate of land acquisition, which is not a bad thing to do if it is done properly. Actually, I call it water acquisitions or water grab rather than land grab, because many of these countries that are coming to acquire land in Africa, they have a lot of land, they have a lot of surface in their countries. What they are lacking is water. Think about the Middle East countries that are coming to invest here. Very briefly, the second aspect I wanted to touch upon is population dynamics. We have to think out of the box. The landscape approach does not mean that you only have to look at the landscape where you want to produce, but actually see the environment in which you are in. As Africans, we will be 2 billion people by 2050. We are 1 billion today. And these people need to be fed and properly fed with quality food. The 15 to 24-year-old population, the youth of Africa from the 15 to 24 years are 200 million people today. They are likely to double by 2045. And what is the world doing about this? Most of them are unemployed. Most of them would be migrating, either within Africa or outside of Africa. And what solutions are being provided at the moment? Electric fences. Electric fences in our houses here in Nairobi, electric fences in the border between Africa and Europe. And we know that is not the solution. We have to find the solution somewhere else. And these people, they have aspirations, they have ambitions, and they see what is happening elsewhere in the world. How are we going to manage that situation? LPFN, is that the only solution, or can we think out of the box? The third issue that I would like to very briefly touch upon is the issue of governance. And when I say governance, you can think about budgets, you can think about treasury, but actually political governance is as much important. Economic governance and social governance. Why is it that this continent is the most prone continent for conflicts? Either that Africans are barbars, or is it that Africans are more keen on fighting each other? What is the situation? Why is it that the governance systems, the traditional governance systems, have been destroyed? By whom and when? How and when are we going to rebuild these traditional governance systems? Look at the externalities that are contributing to the conflicts we are seeing in Africa. And I will give you a few figures. 90% of major armed conflicts between 1950 and 2000 occurred in biodiversity hotspots. People fight for access to resources. People fight for control of resources. High-value natural resources, be they biodiversity or minerals. You can overlay the map of countries in conflict in Africa with the map of natural resources of Africa. Why people are fighting? Who are the ones that are fighting? And who are the ones that are instigating that fight? As I was coming to this hall, I overheard 3 people talking to each other, and one of them said that one country that I would not name here, but I heard the name of that country, was apologizing 2 weeks ago for having assassinated the former president of DRC. Why was he killed? We have to think out of the box when we talk about LPFN, because there are many factors that are contributing to the fact that some people in Africa are undernourished or are not fed properly. And this is not necessarily the fault of these populations. So something wrong is happening in this world. Of the 45 fragile states, 80% contain extractive resources of significance to the global economy. 95% of these contain transboundary water resources and biodiversity hotspots. You can ask yourself, why is it that conflicts mostly occur in areas that are rich, either in biodiversity or natural resources? Why is it that many countries in this continent that are the richest in natural resources are actually the poorest in economy? The richer you are, the poorer your populations. Something wrong is happening. And how can you promote agriculture under these conditions? And who is going to do agriculture when people are busy fighting each other or busy fighting over access to natural resources? And the fourth dimension that I would like to touch upon is the agricultural systems. We in UNEP, we are very keen in promoting what we call sustainable consumption and production. How are we going to feed the 2 billion people in Africa in the year 2050? Is it by increasing the agricultural land to be occupied? Is it by increasing the amounts of pesticides that we are pouring on nature? Is it by increasing the irrigation schemes? Is it by increasing the wastewater we actually dump on nature? Is it by increasing the productivity? Or is it by increasing the productivity while at the same time reducing the food loss? If it is true that up to 40% of the food produced by developing countries is lost before it reaches our plate, there is something fundamentally wrong that we need to address. We cannot just keep moving head on without addressing the 40% loss people produce just to lose mostly, probably close to half of that production. 40% is a lot. So imagine if we were able to reduce by half the food loss that is produced by African population. The other issue that I would like us to address is the food waste. We are in a bizarre world where up to 900 million people go to bed hungry, and yet 1/3 of the food we produce is wasted. So we have to review fundamentally the production and the consumption patterns so as to while we increase the productivity, we also reduce the loss and we reduce the waste. Then maybe we can talk about LPFN, then integration will make sense, then land use will make sense, then we can talk about a holistic approach. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Thiaw. When we look at the cocktail of matters we're discussing, 10 million Kenyans chronically food insecure, the information we've just heard from you about basically 90% of all major land conflicts in Africa occur in biodiversity hotspots. We know we have quite a mandate in front of us for the next 3 days. And so let's just put our heads together and see what kind of outcomes we can come with to present to the likes of Mr. Nyoro and the government of the Netherlands and all the other partners here. I'm sure we could come out with great recommendations going forward. Our next speaker is Mr. Rob van Brouwershaven. He's the director of the Nature and Biodiversity Department of the Ministry of Economic Affairs in the Netherlands. He is responsible for development of national and international nature policy for the Netherlands. He has an extended experience in policy making, especially for the rural areas. I need not say what team he supports. He is from the government of the Netherlands and he's on the winning team, hopefully. Welcome, Mr. Brouwershaven.
Thank you. Good morning to you all, and very good to see you all here. Maybe there are some people in the back of the area that will sit here in front, but that's okay to me. Let me start with expressing my gratitude towards the government of Kenya, and of course to ICRAF and its staff. We have a gathering in a beautiful environment, a perfect place for innovation and action. And I will be back in the program, so I will keep it short now. Our idea in the Netherlands, at the Ministry of Economic Affairs, of organizing a meeting focusing on the relations between food security, biodiversity and business was there already a few years ago. Not only oriented on the Netherlands, but in a global perspective, and especially Africa. Africa, because they have the challenge to develop further in a sustainable way. And because we have similar challenges and related experiences to share, we organized this meeting. In a landscape, everything comes together. And that's also the domain where we found friends who were willing to accompany us in organizing this conference. Without the help of EcoAgriculture partners, the Landscape for People, Food and Nature Initiative and its co-organizers, we never would be successful without them. We set the stage now. It becomes your responsibility to make the outcome. An outcome which should action-oriented, and I wish you a very successful conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Next, may I please welcome to the stage Mr. Tony Simons. Mr. Tony Simons has a presentation, and alongside Tony, could I please welcome the key speakers who have just spoken. Tony has adopted the Kenyan hospitality mentality very quickly, so he does have a gift for you, if you could please come forward.
So James. This book, The Trees of Life, is a celebration of the role of trees in landscapes. It's a book that we published for our World Congress on Agroforestry, our third World Congress in February in India. It's a fantastic celebration of landscapes, and written by Charlie Pye Smith, a chap who can't type and who can't write, but he tells stories, and he tells that into a microphone. So we hope you enjoy learning it. And we have one copy left over, so therefore we'd like to share it with our delightful MC as well.
Wow, thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Showers of heaven raining on me. It feels good to be doing this job. I get to tell you what to do, and I get rewarded for it. Fabulous. Thank you very much, Tony. We're now moving on to the next part of our program, the challenge and opportunity of integrated landscape management. Our next speaker is Sara, Scherr, the president of EcoAgriculture Partners and the chair for the Landscape for People and Nature initiative. Welcome, Sara.
Good morning, everyone. It's wonderful to be here this morning. I feel very inspired after those opening talks. I hope you'll forgive me. I a little bit lost my voice, so I'm not going to talk for very long, but I wanted to give a little bit of an overview for the group. Some of you have been working with the Landscapes for People, Food and Nature for a couple of years, and some of you are new. And I thought we'd give a little bit of a sense of where we've come from and where we're going at this meeting as a start off for this plenary technical session. And one of the things I wanted to say is that we have a lot of people talking with you and to you today in this morning. Almost the entire rest of the session is in dialogue together. So if you'll be patient with us through this first morning, I think it's a wonderful opportunity to get everybody on the same page in terms of their background. So let me start by giving a bit of a sense of history. As most of you know, traditionally in Africa, people were in their landscapes and got everything they needed. Their food, their water, their medicines, their building materials, etc. People did not think in terms of specialized land uses very much. There were certainly a few places where they did. But during the 20th century, as part of global trends, you had a pattern of specialization of land use and separation, that certain kinds of lands were in their best use in crop production, others in their best use in livestock, or their best use in forestry, or that they should be set aside for the conservation of wilderness. And so we developed our institutions in that way. We developed our research in that way. And it really, I think, permeated our thinking about how we were going to use these. And each product had its own supply chain that maybe went very far away and had no interrelationship with what was going on with the forestry. However, that has turned out not to be a very viable way to manage our resources, because we need all of the products and all of the ecosystem services within our landscapes for the populations within them and for those that depend on them. And so during this period, although the dominant force was around this single purpose land use, behind the scenes, in the places where people actually had to live and where they had to produce, they were doing lots of other things with their land management. And there was a lot of innovation going on that really was, most of the people were not that aware, particularly in policy positions. In 2004, 10 years ago, which I'm happy to say was the beginning of EcoAgriculture Partners as well. We're celebrating our 10th anniversary this year, and this is a pretty phenomenal way to do it. We spent time trying to uncover all of that innovation. It wasn't really new. It was that people were kind of hidden. They were not really recognized for the innovations they were doing. They were very poorly supported by policy. But there were many of them. And bringing them all together here, there were more than 200 people from all around the world, I think more than 65 countries back in 2004, and said, there are a lot of us doing this. How can we change the mainstream institutions in a way that support this more holistic vision of getting all the things that we need from our landscapes? In 2011 then, some of the partners that were involved decided that we knew enough to promote this as a mainstream strategy for land management and agriculture, in biodiversity conservation and water. And with 8 co-organizers, one of the leaders of which was the World Agroforestry Center, we started the Landscapes for People, Food and Nature initiative. And as Tony said in the beginning, it wasn't intended to be another network. It was intended to be a coalition of the champions of this approach to move forward to influence the policy, the finance, the technology, the research to support this for all of the myriad different communities of practice that we're trying to take on this approach. One of the first things that we did in the initiative was to launch the Global Review, which was a set of studies to determine what do we know and what don't we know about integrated landscape management, because there actually was not a great deal of documentation at that time. And what was available was very segmented by different disciplines and different groups and different geographies. We also started a lot more dialogue effort. And during 2012, one of the things we did, which I'll discuss in just a moment, was to do the first ever survey of integrated landscape initiatives in Africa, which was really exciting, I think, for all of us to see. We also got a lot of the Landscapes for Peoples and Food and Nature working groups together to start doing action. One of the most exciting one being the rise of a number of networks for knowledge sharing of landscape initiatives, particularly here in Africa. So in 2014, we were very much ready, at the wonderfully generous invitation of the Dutch, to pull together the champions of integrated landscape management and say, what have we learned? And you will see in the documents that we'll be reviewing tomorrow and tomorrow afternoon, the draft synthesis report you gave were drawn very significantly from some of the various global review products. And now is your opportunity to contribute to those. Tell us what we've missed, particularly in terms of a focus on Africa. So our conference today has the objectives to move now from this assessment and analysis, from forming coalitions to taking action. Before I move to the next step, I just wanted to ask for a raise of hands from any of the 9 people here whose organization is one of the 9 co-organizers of the Landscapes for People Food Initiative, or more than 50 strategic partners. Can you raise your hand if you belong to one of those groups? I think it's it's at least half of the people in the room, but it's also our opportunity to get the other half of you involved. So I just wanted to take one moment to very quickly summarize the results of the survey that was done. We identified actually more than 150 integrated landscape initiatives in Africa, but we're able to identify and document 87 of those in 33 countries, which, to tell you the truth, was much more than many of us had felt, because we had fairly strict requirements to be included in the survey. They had to be multi-stakeholder efforts that were intentionally organized around multiple goals, including agriculture, environment, livelihoods, and many cases in terms of climate. They also had to have multiple stakeholders from different sectors, and on average there were more than 9 stakeholder groups in these initiatives from, on average, more than 4 different sectors that were collaborating together. And while not very many of them had more than 10 years, there were a sizable number, and then also been a real proliferation of them in the last 10 years, and they already had begun to document successes in many areas. So this is what we have to build on. And so the question is, what is the actions that will be needed to support these initiatives, which, to tell you the truth, most people were not even aware existed, in terms of how can we improve landscape governance, generate business opportunities through integrated landscape management, build a policy framework that supports ILM, mobilize financing for the kind of investments required for landscape management. How do we strengthen capacities at all levels, from farmers to senior government officials? And how can we prioritize the research that's needed to move these forward in a very effective way? And we've designed this technical session that follows here for the next 5 presentations to provide a framework for us to think about these questions and have a shared basis of knowledge and perspective. And we'll have lots of opportunity to discuss these issues over the next couple of days. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. I forgot to say that Dr. Scherr is an agricultural and natural resource economist specializing in land management policy in tropical developing countries. She is the founder of EcoAgriculture Partners, and she now serves as its president and CEO. In Luya, we say that this is umundu strong, and I'm very proud to be associated with a woman, especially because she is a woman, and it's absolutely delightful to have met you, Sarah. Thank you so much for your remarks. Our next speaker is Richard Munang. Dr. Richard Munang is the United Nations Environment Program, UNEP, Regional Climate Change Program Coordinator and Ecosystem-Based Adaptation for Food Security Coordinator. Previously, he was a Policy and Program Coordinator for UNEP, UNDP, Africa Climate Change Adaptation and Development Program. His focus has been on the role of ecosystems-based adaptation in developing country-specific low-carbon economy, the green economy and sustainable development objectives, such as food security and translating adaptation into practical business strategy. He holds a PhD in environmental change and policy from the University of Nottingham, United Kingdom. Mr. Richard Munang will be coming to tell us the why, and he is a supporter of Team France. He tells me that France is Africa, so let's see how far.
Colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. My presentation is going to be on the imperative for landscape approaches for improved food security and climate resilience in Africa. The vulnerability of African continent to climate change has been clearly established. In 2011, the Horn of Africa suffered the worst drought in 60 years, affecting up to about 12 million people. And in the Sahel in 2012, about 13 million people suffer from drought, affecting the resilience that have been built over so many years. This happening at a time when 1 billion African citizens and up to about 240 million are going to bed hungry, asks us the question whether putting sustainable adaptation practices in place is vitally enough to ensure that the 240 million who go to bed hungry can actually be given alternative opportunities. Last year in November 2013, the UN Environment Programme produced the first Africa Adaptation Gap Report. The Gap Report, as you'll see the statistics, which are quite really scary, shows that under a 2 degree, which is almost imminent that the world is going to hit 2 degrees, crop production in the African continent could reduce up to about 20%, and biodiversity loss could even reduce up to about 81%, spiraling the fundamental underpinning ecosystems that actually ensure crop production. Under a 4 degree, which is almost 40% chance that this is going to occur, crop production will actually reduce, and maize and sorghum, which are actually staple crops that many people in the African continent depend on, will become unviable to be grown in the continent. Rainfall will reduce up to about 30%, and even biodiversity loss will go up to about 100%. These tax statistics, with about 65% of the entire workforce in the continent dependent on agriculture, and agriculture constituting about 32% of the GDP in this continent, shows that most of the gains that have been made will push people back into poverty levels. This report also shows that with the current emissions that have been emitted into the atmosphere today, about 15 billion is needed between now and 2020. And if we reach 2 degrees, which is almost imminent that this will happen, then we will need 35 billion by 2020, and by 2070, 200 billion. All this amount of money, as you can see in this graph, shows that 20% will go into agriculture, 25% will go into water. And the question again, do we, with the current approaches that are in place today, can we be able to address these challenges under a changing climate? The World Bank report Turn Down the Heat that was released also last year re-echo the same findings that the African Adaptation Gap Report had indicated, showing that crop will reduce, and the probability of a 4 degree, which is almost imminent, crops will also reduce, heat extreme events across the continent increasing up to 85%, and 50% declines in water availability. All these happening at a time when the population is projected to increase up to about 2 billion in less than 36 years from today. And at the same time, with the youth population currently between 15 and 24 years, as our Deputy Executive Director indicated, at 200%, I will increase up to, at 200 million, I will increase up to 400 million by 2040, presents a very scary situation. Changing climate change, changing climate, ecological degradation, food insecurity, poverty, all these presenting compounding challenges to the continent. Last year, the Food Security Risk Index showed that globally, out of the 10 most food insecure countries on earth, 10 most food insecure countries on earth, 8 of them are in the African continent. And all the 8 of them that are in the African continent are extreme, at extreme risk. These also coming at a time when the continent have malnourished people, and undernutrition and hunger. Africa is the only continent that since after 1990, hunger levels have increased. Undernutrition currently at the moment is costing up to about 8% of the entire workforce in the continent. And predictions from the UN Economic Commission of Africa shows that this could cause the African continent losses up to about 16% of the GDP. The Africa Adaptation Gap Report shows by 2050, if we hit 2 degrees, malnutrition will increase up to about 95% in West Africa, 85% in Southern Africa, 50% in East Africa, and 25% in Central Africa. All this happening when we know that research after research has shown that the current approaches that are put in place today can only produce 13% of the food that the world needs by 2050. At time 9.6 billion global population, 2 billion in Africa, meaning we need 87%. 87% will have no food by 2050. And at the same time, all this put together, then we ask the question, given this scenario, are we ready? We know that solutions that address climate change, biodiversity, ecosystem services, and nutrients are urgently needed. But these solutions do exist in the continent, but they exist in silos. And at the same time, when the world will graduate by the end of 2015 to the Sustainable Development Goals, approaches that provide cross-cutting solutions and at the same time multiple alternatives are needed. It is unimaginable that we can be able to address food security without actually putting climate change adaptation, bringing climate change adaptation as part of the solution. Increasing food production is not enough. We need to ensure that the ecosystem that underpin agricultural production are intact. The nutrient recycling, the pollinators that are actually essential for agricultural productivity in agricultural dominated landscape become key and parcel. The reason then for landscapes approach are the only approach that can actually address some of the challenges, bringing everything together, ensuring that coordination and integration become part and parcel, ensuring that the land that produces our crops, ensuring that the land that actually conserve our biodiversity can be brought together. Now in this slide, you'll see the different actions that are happening. As speaker after speaker have said, we need to bring everything in a coordinated way. Whether it's land watershed management, whether it's agroforestry, when we bring all these together in a holistic way, then there is the necessity that we can be able to have more gains rather than doing things in silos. These landscape approaches are already happening in the African continent. In Rwanda, for example, through the program led by UNEP and UNDP called CC there, in the district of Gishwati forest that have been depleted for so many years, especially after 1994, we have moved to the mountain. They actually, through some unsustainable practices, cause degraded watershed and deforestation. The intervention was pretty much come up with a land suitability land use map, whereby through this risk assessment tool, the areas whereby people were to be relocated, which were low risk, and relocated to the low risk area and given alternatives, and applying a landscape approach resulted in 4,850 people benefiting from alternatives, application of ecosystem-based adaptation, and also reforestation and giving people alternatives. In Mozambique, for example, using a landscape approach in the southern part of Mozambique called Shai, the intervention of ecosystem techniques but being applied using a landscape approach resulted in not only giving people alternatives, but provided them with techniques that are quite very vital to their daily lives and provided and build a resilient food secure system. These issues present a different paradigm shift that we need today. A paradigm shift that takes us away from focusing on policies that do not actually promote landscape approaches, that do not build on ecosystems-based approaches, that do not build on climate-smart approaches, but takes up to a point whereby any decision and any action and any policy that is put in place should be defined and directed by landscape-based policies. If we do this, if we bring all this together and bring everything that's happening in the continent, and bring this to scale, and give people the opportunity to be able to put this as the rule rather than the exception, we will not only make Africa become a food-secured continent, but it will be a continent where the people doesn't experience the fear of want. Believe it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Munang. Can Africa feed itself? Yes, I think Africa can feed itself and feed the world. That is the Africa we believe in and want to go to. Our next speaker is Mr. Kwesi Atta-Krah. Mr. Kwesi Atta-Krah is a director for the CGIAR research program on integrated agricultural systems for the Humidtropics, which is hosted and led by IITA, the International Institute for Tropical Agriculture. He is the tallest guy in the room. He's the tallest man in the room, so you really can't miss him. And he came to IITA from Biodiversity International, where he has been Deputy Director General from June 2005 until December 2012. Earlier, he was Regional Director for Biodiversity in Sub-Saharan Africa. He worked in the World Agroforestry Center, IITA and ILI, and served on a number of international committees related to agriculture, food security, and environment. He's an agronomist. He holds an MSc and PhD degrees in agroforestry, natural resources management from the University of Ibrahim. Mr. Kwesi Atta-Krah supports the home team Brazil, and welcome to the podium.
Thank you very much. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. And thanks very much to Sara and the LPFN management for inviting me to be part of this. I was part of the first one, so it's good to be back to see how things are moving with this initiative. The picture you are looking at is not taken from Switzerland. It's a picture taken from Africa, and it's taken from the heart of Africa. This is a picture taken from DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo. And it's a picture taken actually from Bukavu. Beautiful terrain. Now, I want you to cast your mind back 50 years ago and try and imagine what that parcel of land looked like 50 years ago. At the same time, I want you to predict 50 years from now, how do you think this parcel of land would look like if business as usual continues? Now it's up to you to determine where we want to be. We can't do anything about the past, but we can do a lot about the future. We can influence, and you can see on that figure that there are quite a lot of agricultural enterprises. So agriculture is part of the issue. Agriculture is part of the issue. So that brings us to climate smart agriculture. Richard has just reminded us how vital and how serious the situation is, and the fact that we need to do a different form of agriculture just to be able to cope and to catch up. Agriculture, as we all know, is threatened by climate change, but also agriculture contributes to climate change. And that's what makes agriculture a very important element. The whole concept of climate smart agriculture attempts to address the adaptation element. How can we make agriculture adapt to the challenge of climate change? But that is not enough. We also need to look at how can we make agriculture part of the solution in addressing issues of mitigation that will position us in a way to be able to continue to produce. Now that includes coming up with a kind of agriculture that minimizes negative externalities, both in terms of the effect on the environment and also in terms of the degradation of the agricultural landscape itself. And of course, in talking about climate smart agriculture, you also have to talk about biodiversity and diversity richness. Diversity in so many different land forms, not just the bio, but even the people, the cultures, and all those elements. They are all critical as we talk about climate smart. So, what then do we mean by climate smart agriculture landscape? Basically, it's a landscape that is carrying a mosaic of climate smart agriculture systems in harmony with other natural resource land management options. So there you see a combination of natural and or human modified ecosystems interacting with the agricultural systems that are in place. It also deals with a configuration of topography, vegetation, land use, and settlement. So looking at the entire holistic diversity that exists. And of course, you can't do that without taking in place the socio-ecological dimension. And there I must emphasize that people are at the center of this. And we heard from our earlier speakers how important it is that the community and the people within communities are seen as the center of this whole debate. So basically, a climate-smart agricultural landscape will be influenced by the ecological, historical, economic, and cultural process and activities of the area that we are dealing with. This picture just gives us, I know you can't read it, but it just gives us the kind of mosaic that we see within a climate-smart agriculture landscape, where you have different landforms addressing different needs of the community, and at the same time addressing the needs of the environment. Bringing this healthy balance between the environment and the needs that we have. So how do we do this, especially when you talk about agriculture? I would say that one of the key things is for us to bring in a systems dimension in our thinking. It's a real prerequisite for climate-smart agriculture. You can't do climate-smart agriculture just by focusing on a single plot basis. And when we talk about a system, we mean interaction between a farming system and a livelihood system. So it actually goes beyond just thinking about multidisciplinarity within a farming system context. You've got to look at it in the wider dimension of the livelihood system within which people live their lives within a defined agroecological space. We also need to recognize that there are multiple components within that system. And therefore, we need to spend time to understand the interactions across these various components. People must be interested in issues of synergy. People must be interested in issues of trade-offs. We've got to be able to analyze all these elements and to be able to understand the role of the larger ecosystem within the context. And as already said, community is key in that. So integrated landscape management requires collaboration among different groups of land managers and stakeholders to achieve the multiple objectives required from the landscape. And so what we're doing here is really the right thing to do, bringing people together from different domains, different disciplines. Hopefully, we carry with us that need for collaboration, because this issue of integrated landscape management cannot be addressed by your single institution alone. It's really about how do we link up, how do we link with the community, agriculture, environment, health, etc., and all that is particularly important. In addressing the issue of food secure landscapes, we also need to realize that we do have some very good examples. We've heard about the agroforestry systems, trees on farm, but we also must recognize that there are within a landscape context tree plots within the landscape. Some of these tree plots will be producing honey. Some of these tree plots will be producing wood lots, but existing within the entirety of that particular landscape. We also must remind ourselves of the proper management of the wild populations in forest and uncultivated lands which border the agricultural lands. The whole interaction across these different components are key. Coming from the agriculture end, I cannot end this presentation without mentioning the need for sustainable intensification. We definitely would need to produce some more food, but we also must be careful not to continue the path of wastage. But in doing sustainable intensification, we've got to realize that there are a number of dimensions to it. There is the ecological intensification dimension, which ensures that we are intensifying without harming the environment. There is a genetic intensification dimension, which ensures that we are coming up with crops and livestock species that do not harm the environment and that can also adapt to the new situations that climate change has created. And also, we need to be reminded of the socioeconomic intensification dimension. All these are critical, but we shouldn't forget the issue of diversification. As you talk about sustainable intensification, you should also see diversification as a key element of sustainable intensification. So it's not about intensifying monoculture. It is about recognizing the importance of diversity and intensifying that to make it more sustainable and more intensive. This is a beautiful picture which basically shows us the richness of this type of intensification. Now, when we talk about priorities for crop genetic improvement and conservation, I just put on this slide just to indicate some of the domains within which we would like to see this intensification take place. Producing new varieties that are adapted to or that mitigate climate change and other issues that are put in there, but critically making agriculture have a kind of a reduction to greenhouse gas emission is a key element of research that is done within this context. I also want to mention that there are a number of initiatives aimed at natural area and wildlife habitat and watershed protection, and all these are key elements in the climate-smart agriculture landscape, because you really want to see how all these elements interact with agriculture. So we're talking about a new kind of agriculture, an agriculture that looks broader than just producing particular acreage of particular commodities, but does that in the context of the broader ecosystem. So who needs to be part of these multifunctional landscapes? We've mentioned communities. We've mentioned the importance of policymakers, various organizations, some of which are represented in this room. We've mentioned various organizations such as within the CGIAR, we have the special program on climate change, agriculture, and food, known as CCAFs. We also have particular programs that have been set up to look at all these agricultural issues from a systems perspective. And one of the programs, Humidtropics, is the one that I lead, and basically looking at a new way of, not necessarily new, but an integrated manner of looking at agriculture from a systems perspective. We need all these sort of initiatives to help to move us to the kind of situation that we want to be. This slide just gives us some example of some of the work that is going on. More than 80 communities of practice practicing this climate-smart agriculture. Some integrated watershed management, some looking at greening agricultural corridors, some are talking about territorial development, model forest, biological corridors, landscape restoration, so many other names, but essentially they are doing the same thing. It's really, but I can tell you, we are in the minority. And we can meet like this and declare victory, and the system keeps going down. The challenge is, what do we need to do to be able to change the broader socio-technical regime? And that means stronger links with policy. We've got to influence things. Otherwise, we will be declaring victory while the situation is slipping from our hands. And that is absolutely critical. And I think this is my final slide. It basically encourages those of us from the research domain to put emphasis on research. Is that mine? To put emphasis on research from a systems perspective, which will be addressing a landscape mindset, a multi-research and development team, a stakeholder engagement, a mechanism for stakeholder engagement, a mechanism for institutional innovation in the work that we do, to look at things at scale and not just focus on plot level, and also to be reminded that community consists of men, women, and youth, and children, so we have to build that in. And finally, to look at the whole issues of development orientation. So in my final slide, I just want to say that I believe there is hope for the future, but that hope really begins with you and I putting our institutional hearts together and working together with others so that we can make it happen. And I believe we can do it. Thank you.
Good morning. So now we'd like to take just a few minutes as we run up to the break to talk about the people at the center of the workshop. And I'd first like to introduce my phenomenal, amazing co-facilitator. This is Cora van Oosten. Cora's from Wageningen University. Cora.
I'm supporting, of course, the Dutch. May I also introduce my wonderful new friend who feels like a very old friend, Constance. Originally, she's from the United States, but she currently lives in Kenya and Italy. I think she's one of these global citizens, and I'm very happy to be working with you. So she's Constance, and I'm Cora, but you may also say that I'm Cora, and she's Constance, or she's Cora, and I'm Constance. It's all the same thing, doesn't matter. Constance. Oh, me.
Please.
Oh, me, yes, of course. Yes, to stay in the World Cup mood, I brought a globe or a balloon or a football. But this is not only related to the World Cup, this is very much related to the landscapes. Because the landscapes is all about food and nature and people, but it's particularly about place, about location, about geography. So that is why this is our common instrument. And I would like you to talk, actually. We've listened, and we've listened to wonderful stories, but we've heard enough. I think it's over to us now. So I'm going to throw the ball, I'm going to throw the world. And the one who catches the world can say loudly who he or she is and where he or she is from. No lectures, just brief, okay? Here we go. Oh, yeah!
Susan.
Who are you?
I come from Kenya. I work for the East African Community Commission. We are taking care of the Lake Victoria Basin landscape.
Wonderful. So, okay, so we have United States, Kenya, Uganda, South Africa. Who we have next? Wonderful. Tanzania. Who's the next one? Woo! Nobody. It's placelessness. Yes. We have a new country here. Wonderful. Who's next? Yes.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Mamadou Diakité. I'm from Senegal originally, but I work for the new economic partnership for African development, the NEPAD, based in South Africa.
So we have 8 different countries already. Which is country number 9? Yeah, a lady. No. So another one from the United States. Please pass it on, and a lady this time should catch it. Yeah.
Good morning, everyone. I'm come from South Africa. I work for an organization called Living Lands. We are based in Muchiri.
Wonderful. Living Land. That is a beautiful name. Who's next? Please, who are you?
I'm Irmgard Höschle-Zeledon. I'm from Germany, and I support the Germans, of course.
Oh, bad choice.
I work for IIGA, and I'm based in Ibadan, Nigeria.
So Germany, Nigeria. Gosh, we are 12 countries now. Have I counted well? That's wonderful. I think during the break we'll have lots of time to exchange more. But I find it amazing that we haven't doubled any country yet. There are more countries present. Constance, I would like to know more about the professional background of the people.
I am very keen to find this out. Let's get a visual on this. But as you heard James Nyoro this morning say, I used to be on the other side of the fence, right? We've all been in those different positions. So let's just get a view of which institutions you're associated with now, as we speak, as you came to this meeting. So could I ask those people that are directly managing those landscapes? our farmers and our farmers' organization representatives to please stand up. All right, fantastic. There might be a few more people serving as farmers and farmers' organizations. Please, let's give this group an applause. Welcome. Can we get now a sense of those of you that work with local or national NGOs? Local or national NGOs? Could you please stand up? There we go. Getting a bit more momentum. Fantastic. Okay, and those of you from the international NGOs, the bingos and the INGOs, where are you? Good. I like seeing people stand up more than once. Woohoo! Fantastic. Welcome. All right, let's get a sense of the private sector. We've heard you referred to many times this morning. Who's in the room from the private sector? Works for themselves or? All right, and we know that our farmers could also stand. Thank you very much. Our research and academia, those educators and scientists in the room, could you please stand up? Nice. Beautiful. You see your contingent members. Our government representatives, if you work for your national government, please stand up. Welcome to you. And now our intergovernmental organizations and our regional intergovernmental groups, please. We have our UNEPs, our FAOs, our NEPADs, our economic commissions. Beautiful. Anybody didn't get a chance to stand up? You're good. Okay. Please. Tell me who you're with. Tell us your name. Tell us your institution.
The African Model Forest Network.
Africa Model Forest Network. All right, we're going to hear more from you. Thank you so much. Let's talk about where we're from.
Yes, actually, that's the thing about landscape approaches. We've talked about our countries, we've talked about our institutions, we've talked all about these concepts, food security and nature and whatnot, but we haven't talked about our own connection to our own places. And I think when we think of landscapes, the best way to understand what a landscape is to think of what is actually my place and how am I connected to my place. What is the landscape that I call mine, that I own, that I'm responsible for, that I will fight for if it's threatened. So please, I would like you, maybe one by one, maybe make pairs of 2 or pairs of 3. And can you explain to each other what you feel is your landscape? And what is it that makes that landscape yours? Can you please do that?
To your neighbor.
Turn to your neighbor and exchange. have your attention? May I have your attention? Shh. May I have your attention? You see, this is what always happens. When people start talking about their place, their landscapes, they can't stop talking. You can't silence them. Look, I've noticed a few things when I was watching you talking. When you started talking, I saw a lot of smiles. People started smiling. I want to know from some people, Maria, why did you smile when you talked about your landscape?
I felt so connected to it, and it brings a sense of ownership as well. And when you're explaining it to someone new, you actually realize, oh, I have a landscape that I have to go back to as well.
Now she got it. You get the landscape approach. Somebody else, please. I did see a big smile on your face. Why was that smile?
Please, could you give me?
Your neighbor, yes. Why were you smiling?
I found a friend of mine working on the same landscape, and we are the same.
You see, we saw a sense of ownership there. We saw a sense of connection, friendship, people finding themselves through what they have in common, which is their place. Okay, those are a few things that I've just wanted you to experience. We're going to have a lot of technical discussions here, but I would like you to think throughout this conference about the personal part of it, your connection to your place. And the question is then, why is it that you feel happy when you talk about your place? And why is it that you feel angry when your place is threatened? And why is it that you come into action when actually somebody comes in and say, hey, let's do something about your place. Let's make it better. That is the sense of ownership, of responsibility, the sense of place that I wanted us to collectively experience. I will not take much time of your break. So I would like to hand over to Wangui, because I think, Wangui, you have quite some household announcements. Yeah?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Cora.
Oh, maybe Wangui, sorry. Yes. Please, this wonderful conversation, continue during the break, because it's important. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Cora and Constance. I am delightful to note that you all went to where I come from, my landscape. Larry yesterday, anyone who went to Larry? Did you see the beautiful blankets of tea when you got there? Just green, lush blankets of tea. Such is Africa. I'd encourage you to visit more often if those of you who are out of Africa. We do have a press conference right now during the break. If the members of the first panel could meet Daisy Onya on my left, right here at the corridor, she will take you to where you need to go. We will be back in this room at 11 o'clock sharp. So please have your landscape discussions and be back inside this room at 11 o'clock sharp. You are dismissed for break.